complicated and interconnected. They include things like investment and funding, the really fragmented skill system that we have, a constant and evolving set of skills needs, various different learner barriers that intersect in all sorts of different ways. The digital divide, whether it's the skills question or the devices and access question, but also things like the value of learning, and whether we're building the right evidence of what works to get people from training and into work, which is the piece that we're particularly interested in, and trying to address it as systemically as we can, because obviously these challenges sit across not just the skills system, but across the economy as a whole, and they intersect with things like health and well-being and various other areas in all sorts of different ways. I want to take a little bit of time whilst we've got this, hopefully provide some information for the sort of Q&A and discussion section next, just to touch on a couple of projects. I flicked through our directory. So we've funded over 200 projects in the last 10 years, about £30 million of grant from this. There's a lot to choose from. But I picked out a couple that I thought were particularly interesting and relevant to this question of essential skills and some of the challenges that we might think about. The first one is national numeracy. We've worked with national numeracy for a number of years now, supporting a range of different programs, all looking at supporting people who furthest away become number confident. A lack of confidence with numeracy is a real critical barrier that lots of different adults face, whether it's in their everyday lives, whether it's in their working lives or personal lives, and certainly when it comes to learning. We all know that maths and getting a basic level of maths education now is essential for engaging in almost any other part of the adult education system, and ensuring and providing people with clever digital tools online that are flexible, modular, can be really transformational. National University have done some fantastic work that I know we've been really proud to support. Take a slightly different tack. Another organisation we've worked with a lot over the last few years is called Thrive, and they have a programme called Careers Matters. They work with people who are care experienced and coming out of the criminal justice system to provide wraparound support that connects people to not just training and skills provision, but also connects them into the broader landscape of support that exists for people coming out of care. Obviously, for people coming out of care, there's lots of different complex barriers that they face when it comes to accessing training and then work. Maybe only 17% of people, out of the 10,000 young people who leave care every year, will get 5 GCSEs. Only 2% of young people coming out of care will go on to an apprenticeship. And most worrying of all, 27% of people in prison are care experienced. A real critical challenge there in trying to support people onto a journey into employment. And for us, I think what Career Matters shows is the value of the wraparound support that technology integrated cleverly and providing people with a range of different guided support opportunities alongside a really person-centered approach can provide valuable support that helps people get not only into training, but then on into employment and ultimately stable and thriving lives. And finally, I just want to talk about a really maybe slightly more techie one. So we've worked with an organisation called Click to Learn on a range of programs, one called Journey to Basic Skills. They support people who might be very skilled in a native language, like a foreign nurse, training their English skills for employment in the UK. Often these are people with very high levels of skills or relatively high levels of skills, but where access to English training is difficult, but can be proved transformational to their opportunities in work. There's really clever tech platforms that provide tailored support on hand, on demand, whenever's needed, in really quite clever ways. So happy to discuss as we go through this in more detail all the different ways that technology can play a role. But I think those broad systemic barriers to participation in learning and in work are the key thing here that we really need to be thinking about how we address as a whole. That all of these are little solutions that need to knit together into something much bigger and much broader if we're to get more adults learning. Hopefully I've just finished about on time, I think.
Thank you, Josh. That's great. Really interesting to hear those project examples there, and I'm sure we might dig into some of those in a bit more detail in our discussion. Just a reminder before we move on to our next input, please do, if you have any questions for either Josh or Joe, please do contribute those in the chat and we'll start to pick them up. But I'm going to come now to Sean, and I think you're going to talk to us a bit about the work that you're doing in Sunderland around Multiply in particular. So Sean, over to you.
Okay, thank you. Just checking you can actually hear me. Okay, great. So yeah, as been said, my name is Sean Lewis, and I'm the Learning and Development Manager here in Sunderland, overseeing the Multiply initiative. Just a bit of background there, Sunderland being obviously a large coastal city. However, with that comes a lot of the economic issues that plague many of the smaller coastal communities across the country, so low literacy rates, numeracy rates, etc., amongst the working age population, and obviously that's stemming and impacting on any possible economic growth and development of the person themselves. So on that note, I'll also give you some information around Multiply. For those of you who might not know, Multiply is a government initiative all to do with linking adult learners with easy access courses that try to, first and foremost, break down the stigma of low numeracy ability and skills. And then from that baseline, build up confidence, build upon the newly acquired confidence that is meant to come from these courses, and progress learning towards positive outcomes, be that further study with specific goals being around higher functional skills rates, and also obviously indeed towards employment or promotion. So specifically in Sunderland, this initiative obviously is nationwide, with myself just managing the Sunderland-based version. So with that in mind, Sunderland economic inactivity roughly stands at around 26%. Nationally, I know the figures more we know is about 20%. So higher rates of inactivity there in Sunderland than we have nationally. But even those who are currently in work are struggling to progress with their current skill level and ability across things like English and maths. So with Multiply, there's the focus for learners who are both actively trying to progress themselves, but also those who perhaps don't realise that their low numeracy ability is hindering their chances of success and in being economically active. So how we've gone about that, we've been partnering, subcontracting with a range of providers across the city. In turn, these providers are working within their communities to link up directly with learners, and in the best cases, bring the learning directly to the learners. So it was always a key priority for Sunderland to ensure that that learning took place within the community setting, rather than being centrally located within the centre of the city. So really the sort of thought process behind that is that public transport issues, lack of personal vehicular access is often cited as one of the key barriers in terms of why learners are not attending courses to completion. So we're trying to preempt those issues by offering the learning within the community setting. Multiply funding also allows for learners to access support in terms of childcare, meaning that wraparound support is available for where barriers might have been in place. So very quickly, what sort of learning is taking place? Well, Multiply is broken down into what are called interventions. These range from specifically and overtly focused on developing functional skills to more generalized areas that allow a more maths by stealth approach, such as managing finances through shopping budgets or community cooking classes with a focus on measuring and weights and things like that. Some of our greatest success on Multiply is coming through via courses such as those. For example, I attended a community event where one of our providers explained that half the learners due to receive their certificate weren't able to attend that day because they've gone into employment. So obviously those are the successes that we're looking for. Now, it's not all down to Multiply, but the massive work of these community-based providers in supporting learner progression around things like CV development, interview techniques, etc. So the key takeaways from Sunderland so far, because it has only been running for about 12 months, with myself in post for half that time, there is a clear and unarguable need for a learner journey strategy that links across provision and services. Learning has to go to the learners for attendance to be maintained, is what we're finding. Linking between providers and other support services is also imperative for that learning journey to progress to successful outcomes. Something that we've seen work really well with healthcare providers coming into some of these sessions and providing support within the actual learning environment. Finally, things like destination tracking and learner communication after the course has been completed is also vital to stop any learners slipping back into old habits or those success outcomes beginning to fade. So these barriers and success outcomes are obviously unique to each learner. And so what the real key point that we're finding is that learner journey strategy, also has to be incredibly unique to each learner in order to be successful. And we'll just have to see how the next year and a half of Multiply go, but that's where we're up to at the moment.
Thank you, Sean. That's brilliant. Gives us a really good overview of your Multiply program there. Excuse me. So let's kind of dig into some of that in a bit more detail. I can't see any questions in the chat yet, unfortunately. If people would like to ask a question, there is also the option to raise your hand, and we can ask you to unmute and come and ask the question yourself. So if anybody wants to do that, we'll keep an eye out for hands going up as well. But if I can kind of pick up on something that sort of jumped out to me across all three of those inputs, there is that there is kind of, a sense that there are people are facing many sort of multiple and overlapping barriers, and there's sort of overlapping needs in terms of different kinds of skills, whether it's sort of numeracy, literacy, digital, financial capability around health. There's clearly a lot going on there. So where do you start in all of that? What's the sort of, where are the touch points for engagement? And, are any of those areas, I think you maybe touched on some of it, Sean, but, what are the sort of pull factors and motivational factors that can kind of help you to engage with people and then sort of pick up on a range of those support needs? But what's the way in? What's the starting point? And maybe Joe, if I can come to you first of all on that, because I think that came through quite strongly in your presentation as well.
Yeah, that's fine. I mean, engagement is always tough, and we're a social landlord. We've got 350,000 tenants, and we do struggle to get to those people who need it the most. And actually, those who are most vulnerable, who would benefit the most from our services, are the ones that we find hardest to get to, because there's a lot of unknowns. There's a lot of people who don't come forth. I mean, we really pull down on our internal services, and I think one of the benefits we have is that we know when somebody's in financial crisis, for example, because they won't be paying their rent, so we can put in interventions, but then it does make our service quite reactive, and what we want to do, we want to be kind of put in front of that rather than waiting for somebody to get to a place as when they need support. So for us, it's kind of definitely pulling down from our internal services. We do a lot of outreach, so visually out on the ground, we try and get out a lot. So tapping in with small community providers, and our communities team do an awful lot of that, and they make a lot of links with local provision, because again, we're a big believer in that people like to access services that are local to them. So we would rather go to those services that are experts in their area and have that trust and that rapport with local residents, for example, than us trying to go in there on our own. So we're very much around that collaboration and working with those much kind of smaller organisations on the ground.
Great, so thanks, Joe. And just sticking with that sort of theme around the sort of financial aspect of this, whether it's kind of sort of responding to financial need, or maybe trying to get ahead of that in terms of supporting people with household budgeting, obviously, particularly important at the moment with the rising cost of living. I think, Sean, you mentioned that had been a particularly successful strand of your Multiply delivery. So has it been the case for you as well, that sort of linking essential skills like numeracy to a sort of, concrete and kind of meaningful challenge that people are facing has been a good way of engaging people and then supporting them into further learning.
I think so. Yeah, I think especially around a core skill like maths, I think there's a vast majority of us out there who, if someone was to plonk a maths test in front of us right now, we might not be very happy about it. And I think that stigma around it carries through many people's lives forever, and they just never have to deal with it because they don't look at the problem. Whereas I think being able to embed delivery around core issues that are going on in a person's life, like the financial issues of the moment. Even just as another example, we've embedded it within driving theory, for example. And again, so these skills that people need, getting that maths by stealth, as I mentioned before, approach has been much more successful than perhaps we've had on other, for example, on the adult education side, generally, where it's been pitched as a maths course. So, for example, all of our marketing for Multiply in Sunderland doesn't actually mention the word maths anywhere. It mentions numeracy, but it doesn't mention maths. And I think that's been quite important. I would just also add that I cannot overemphasize my view on the feedback that we're getting, that it's exactly what Joe said as well, which is getting into the communities, the people that are trusted. Because me walking into a meeting and saying how great all of these things are to a group of people, it doesn't necessarily work. But the communities, the community group, should I say, saying the same thing tends to carry much more weight. And so having that point of contact is what's proved so important.
Right, thank you. Yeah, and I think that community-based dimension is something that's coming out a lot. So there's clearly some value there in the sort of connection between the real life, sort of pressing, in some cases, skills needs where people can really see how it will benefit them, like the financial side. I wondered, Josh, if I can come to you, is digital another example of that? Is a place where people can kind of, see that there's a benefit I guess there's a twin benefit in terms of kind of essential digital skills themselves, and then also if people do develop their digital skills, increasingly that provides a way in which they can access other forms of support and learning online as well. But is the digital dimension to this a bit of a hook and something that can potentially help with that question of how do we best engage people into a program of support that may have a number of dimensions to it?
Yeah, certainly. And just to sort of pull back and echo some of the comments from Sean and Joe as well, that meeting people where they are, I think the critical part of all of our work here at UFI is trying to encourage the projects where we're working, with various different communities to be sure to understand the learners that they're working with. Without a deep understanding of the learners you're trying to engage, or the people you're trying to engage, you're often not going to be successful. And hearing Sean talk about community groups and their powerful reach is really interesting. We did a piece of research last year looking at exactly the question of how you motivate people into career and training. And one of the things that it taught us, it was with the RSA called Rebalancing Adult Learning. And one of the things it taught us was that unlike maybe what we'd expected, things like the financial motivation of learning, i.e. you might earn a little bit more money, was not as powerful as things like seeing people like you doing the learning and benefiting from it, having people you trust recommending it to you, were all far more powerful motivators for people, particularly those people who hadn't engaged in learning before. That you see the financial benefits of it once you've already done it, but it's very hard to see those financial benefits and think about those financial benefits without having done it. Whereas when it's people you trust and people recommending it, they can be really powerful. To the digital role in that, certainly there's obviously a value here in giving people the digital skills they need to get onto what in many cases nowadays are online, or at least partially or at least hybrid training courses. Absolutely critical to getting people the skills they need alongside literacy and numeracy, but also the role of digital technology in its broadest sense that we work in, that modularization, breaking up learning, allowing people to do it in their homes at their own time, allowing people to do it more flexibly, all hopefully play a role in making the opportunities that learning gives make far more accessible, allows it to wrap around people's lives in a much more fulsome way than previously, where maybe you'd have always had to have gone to a place or been in a place. Not to say that it negates the role of people, but it allows people to then move on to those valuable roles and supporting them directly, where technology can hopefully alleviate some of the burden of training.
Thanks, Josh. And I really like that point about the importance of people seeing people like them learning and benefiting from it. I mean, as some of you will know, every year pretty much we do an annual survey of adult participation in learning. And one of the things that comes up in that time and time again is that people say that actually there isn't anything stopping them from learning, but they don't want to, because they don't see how it can benefit or help them. So trying to make some of those connections is really important. I'm just sticking with the digital. There is a question from Kirsty that's come in, and that's for Sean, about whether your Multiply is delivered in person or online. And Kirsty is saying that there's a growing trend of customers opting for online courses rather than face-to-face because of the flexibility. But it's more difficult to find fully funded functional skills courses that are delivered online. So I don't know, are you able to tell us what it is that you're doing in Sunderland on that?
Yes, so there's the actual provision itself nationally as an initiative is you can have both online or offline courses. I believe that we do have some online courses. With regard specifically to the functional skills question, yes, similar. Most of them are in person. I believe we do have one provider who's offering some online functional skills provision through Multiply. But I will say that some of the hardest elements of that is kind of linking in with Josh's elements there, that the issue we're finding in Sunderland is that, and this goes contrary to what I personally believed coming into the role and my assumptions that I'd made coming into the role, and then obviously I've sort of learned the truth, which is the massive amount of digital poverty within the city. And so actually my assumption that, oh, well, we'll just offer everything online and then that'll make everything so much easier, actually was proved massively wrong. So thankfully, no, we didn't listen to me at that point. And actually in person has been much more needed, because a lot of people simply don't have access to the technology that they need, or the internet access. For example, they might be on pay and go phones even. So you don't have access to those pieces of technology that would allow them to. So we have, again, to link back to the original question, we have sort of had to balance our thoughts on that around actually putting it in a community centre, as many community centres as possible, has been more successful than offering it online. And I think, just again, to harp back to the community element, I think it's exactly what Josh said. We're getting the same feedback. Money does not seem to be a massive driver of wanting to learn and wanting to develop skills. And I think that that's possibly somewhere the government is going wrong, in a sense of focusing on, you can get a better salary by doing this, because a lot of people, it's not about that. And actually what they are enjoying is the community spirit, community connections, linking up with people, seeing, as we've said, people like them doing X, Y, Z, and then having that trusted conversation that is pushing them forward, that learner journey that I talked about earlier. And that's a lot of what we're getting back as well. So I think it's quite it'd be an interesting research piece, I think, for the government to undertake.
Yeah, thanks, Sean. I think that social dimension and the social connections that people gain through participation in learning definitely shouldn't be underestimated. Joe, if I can come back to you and kind of moving on to sort of, we talked a bit about how do we engage people, but then as we've kind of discussed, has come through really clearly, there's, sort of multiple and overlapping skills needs. There is a wide range of other support that people might need, whether it's around employment, whether it's with their health, that kind of thing. how have you, and clearly, you know, I think from what you've said and from what Josh has said, there's clearly, you know, there's a need for holistic packages of support. But could you say a bit more about how do you, once you've got somebody engaged, how do you kind of unpick those needs a bit, and how do you, I can see that there's a need for a holistic program, but how do you kind of make it into, how do you decide what the sequencing is, and how do you sort of work out what to do at what time with people so that they get what they need at the right point?
Yeah, with difficulty, I would say. I mean, we always aim to do that, and a big piece of that comes down to having a really good relationship with our customers, and we build that up. It doesn't always happen overnight. For some, it's over months, some it's years, and that's building up that rapport between our operational staff providing the support and the individual themselves. Obviously, we're quite reliant on them in terms of what they want to share with us. I'd like to think over time that the majority of our customers do start to open up. We do have a mental health specialist as part of our active inclusion program as well, who provides support for customers but also to our colleagues, and provide advice to them to help individuals who may be showing some signs of complex support needs. But yeah, it's a really difficult one. We try and triage as best as we can. We do have a central service called Guideline, so we try and put all our referrals through that kind of service so they could start having those conversations. But as with anything, and anyone who's done ESF provision, where you have to kind of, you know, talk about medical conditions, whether somebody has a disability, and you fill it out on the paperwork, it's not usually until months down the line that somebody may actually come out and tell you if they have or not. So it's a long journey process, I would say. Definitely about building up all the really good rapport with our customers, getting to know them as individuals, making them reassured that we are not a sort of statutory service. You know, we're not here to provide sanctions or anything like that. We're here because we genuinely want to support them, and that is done through our colleagues on the ground who have those similar passions and they want to help those individuals.
Thanks, Jo. So I'm hearing there that there's the importance of that sort of long-term relationship and building that. And I guess is it important to you as well? Do you kind of to say that you're a non-statutory service, but is it important to you to kind of have those links and relationships where you can kind of refer in?
Absolutely. Yeah, and you know, we have to obviously we did run a program actually called Pure Insights, which was about providing counselling support to our employment support officers on the ground, because we were quite aware they were carrying quite a lot of weight and of you know, on behalf of the individuals, of what they were disclosing to them. But obviously we are not counsellors, and we do make sure that our staff do tap into those resources locally. But even just navigating that, I mean, that's a huge task in itself, and we cover such a large area, so that can be a big challenge, just to make sure that we've got the right contacts and relationships on the ground to help people. But we are very much aware as to where our kind of limitations are in terms of support, and then when it would be right for us to signpost somebody to other provision and maybe provide a lighter touch support to them.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Jo. And Josh, if I could come to you on that as well, is there a role here for technology in sort of helping to kind of sequence and organise and, you know, coordinate some of the support that's available and helping people to access the things that they need at a particular time?
Yeah, and certainly some of the things I pointed to Thrive Career Matters in my opening as one of those sort of online platforms that supports care experienced people in with that wraparound support and information on the wraparound support. But equally, other programs like, for example, Entitled to Learn. So Entitled to Learn is an offshoot that we've supported from Entitled To. They're an organisation that support people in finding out things like what benefits they're entitled to. The idea being that when people are looking to find out what benefits they're entitled to, you can also support them in identifying things like courses and adult training opportunities that they might also be available to them. And there's obviously lots of really clever ways that can take place. I think one of the other sort of really interesting ways that technology can support is things through like micro-credentialing and digital badging. we've supported with the RSA a program called Cities of Learning that takes badging as a way of identifying all different pathways and routes through various complex landscapes, so that you can go from one piece of training to another piece of training, but equally that can, you know, cross apply to loads of other things. And we know, you know, there's lots of things out there already that we can see where technology is playing a really interesting role in connecting people and communities to different pieces of information that they wouldn't have received before. I guess again, all of this is none of these things work in isolation. They're a part of a broader and more systemic whole, that the system itself is so fragmented and complex that it's so incredibly difficult for anybody to navigate, not just the learning and skills piece, but every other element of the employment and training system is incredibly complicated, and it varies by region now. And whilst lots of these things offer opportunities, you know, greater specificity to local problems, it also presents new challenges when it comes to identifying what people can actually do in an area, and more chance of creating these confusing national narratives that maybe aren't reflected in local pictures. So trying to think about it as a whole, as a system, is for us absolutely crucial, and obviously digital can play a role in that, but it really needs to be a systems first sort of thinking.
Great, thank you, Josh. There's some really helpful reflections there on systems change and what we can do to address that. I think that pretty much brings us to our time for this breakout session. So thank you very much to Joe, Josh and Sean for your contributions. It's been really interesting to hear about the work that you're doing, and thank you for sharing that with us today. We would ask participants now, please do join us for the final session of the summit. The link has just been posted in the chat there, so you can leave this Zoom meeting and join the main session at the link that's in the chat for you. So thank you all for joining us today, and hope to see you in the main room.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye. Bye.
Thank you.